As you drive along many of Berrien County's roads, some paved but mostly dirt, you may not realize you are passing through one of Berrien County's ghost towns. Few have any physical remains of the once thriving community, but they are ghost towns just the same. They once had 50 or 100 residents, a commercial establishment or two, a school, a church, and sometimes a cemetery. Several had a post office or a telegraph, many a flag stop on one of the 4 railroad lines crossing through the county. But usually something happened in the lives of these residents, or in their business fortunes, or in the world around them, and slowly their history was left behind and soon forgotten. Oh, the names are still there, in part or whole. Allendale, Lois, Glory, Bannockburn, Gladys, Weber, Connell, Rowtown, Baker Sawmill, and others. Each has its own story to tell, so come on along with me and visit a few ghost towns of Berrien. Before Georgia Highway 76 was built eastward from Nashville, the Nashville-Avra Mill Road was the only road connecting communities from Nashville to Willacoochee. However, Avra Mill was the main destination of its travelers, and a true history buff will want to take that route, though I would only recommend it during a dry spell rather than after a recent rainstorm. However, if you wish to take Highway 76 east out of Nashville and turn onto Lake Lewis Road, it is paved all the way to Avra Mill. The mill house is not the picture of activity it is known over the past century or so. No wagons loaded with corn to be ground, no restaurant to satisfy a hungry crowd, no young folks sunbathing on the sandy banks, just a metal gate, chain locked to discourage curiosity seekers. In 1853, William M. Avra purchased land lots 147 and 176 in the upper 10th district of Berrien County. He purchased the land for the mill, church, and school from James Griffin for 50 cents an acre. Though the name in the community came from the Avra grist mill, the early settlement was on the southwest bank of the Avra Mill Pond, now known as Lewis Lake. Among his neighbors were Sylvester Taylor, Charles Polk, T.J. Powell, several Griffin families, Thomas J. Griffin, J.J. Griffin, and James M. Griffin, as well as others. The James M. Griffin home is the only one remaining today, though it was remodeled some by his son, Wilmer Griffin, and as today's photo shows, has lost much of its historic integrity. In 1880, William Avra had the idea to build a dam across 10 Mile Creek and completed the task in 4 years. The dam creating the Avra Mill Pond was built by hired workers hauling dirt in wheelbarrows at the low price of $1 per task. A task consisted of 3 square yards of dirt and required about 2 days of hard labor. The mill was operated by water power from the large pond formed by the dam, providing a means to operate a grist mill, a cotton gin, a rice cleaning machine, and a sawmill. A smaller dam upstream created a large gin pond to run a sawmill, which provided the heart pine lumber to build the Abram Mill House. The original millstones and rice cleaner are still preserved in the mill house. Though schooling was likely taking place prior to 1908, that is the first year the school known as Abram Mill School was recorded. It had been built in the northwest corner of Land Lot 176 near the properties of J.J. Griffin and James M. Griffin. However, about 1910, the first school burned to the ground, and another one was built in its place in 1911. The new school provided an education for the white students for 25 more years until 1936. That year, the school was abandoned and the students attended classes at the Gaskins Consolidated School. William Avra worked at the mill and lived in the Avra Mill community throughout the rest of his life. He and his second wife, Martha Deering, lived in this fine double-gable farm home at the end of this lane, just about a quarter mile east of the mill house. This home would also provide a residence for other Avra Mill owners. In 1895, Mr. Avra was the organizing member of the New Hope Primitive Baptist Church near his home. 1 year later, in March 1896, William M. Avra passed away and was laid to rest beside his first wife, Harriet Jones Avra, in the Griffin Cemetery. According to his obituary, he was a hard-working man, and by his untiring industry and economy, he accumulated a good property, notwithstanding his many losses by fire. There were other owners and operators of the Avra Mill during the next 3 decades following the death of William Avra, including Jesse B. Boyette, pictured here with his family. Mr. Boyette is seated in the touring car. But perhaps the most noteworthy of them all was J. Lonnie Lewis, who purchased the mill and surrounding properties in 1933, including the William Avra home place. He renovated the home in the early 1950s, but it has since been torn down. Lonnie Lewis grew up in the Avra Mill District, attended Avra Mill School and Nashville High. He met and married Mittie Lean Phillips in 1919, and they were blessed with 3 daughters, Pauline Beasley, Bonnie Connor, and Phyllis Hancock. He was engaged in farming and turpentining as well as operating the mill. For 25 years, Lonnie and his wife Mittie Lean had dreamed about making Avra Mill a water sports resort for swimming, boating, water skiing, fishing, and hunting, with beaches for sunbathing and a restaurant for fine dining. In 1958, they decided to make their dream a reality, starting with building of an auxiliary dam so the pond could be drained to pull all the old stumps from the bottom of the lake. The lake had been drained every few years or so and sold fishing rights for anyone who wanted to fill their coolers. In the 1920s and 30s, the fee was $5 a person, but by 1991, the price had gone up to $20 a day. They brought in white sand for the beach fronts for swimming and boating. Larson Boats Company in Nashville began using the lake for its promotional photo shoots. Water skiing exhibitions were scheduled to bring attention to the facilities there at Lake Lewis. The mill house was expanded and completely remodeled with a commercial kitchen installed, all to make the Averill Mill dining experience first class. A store and service station was built to offer groceries and fishing needs, with a ceramic shop in the back for producing souvenirs. Even overnight lodging was built to accommodate the tobacco buyers from Nashville. The Averill Mill Resort had finally taken shape, and it was such a fulfillment of the Lewis couple's dreams, though it took a lot of work and money. And the work was just beginning, and the children could pitch in, and the grandchildren as they grew older. It was a family affair. But 10 years later, on May 31st, 1968, Lonnie Lewis passed away. Overseeing the Averill Mill Resort now rested on Mitty Lean, 65, and the girls. Another 10 years went by, and the task of upkeep of the resort was taking its toll. Mitty Lean expressed the desire to let the next generation determine the future of Averill Mill Resort. Mitty Lean Phillips Lewis passed away on July 23, 1988, and she was laid to rest next to her lifelong partner in marriage and business. They are buried at Westview Cemetery in Nashville. By 1990, the resort was showing its age. Many of the buildings were in need of repair or already beyond. The restaurant had been closed for a period of time, but in June 1992, Pauline Beasley's daughter, Gail Milligan, wanted to give it another try. She opened the old mill restaurant with great hopes the atmosphere of the lake and the historic old mill would be just what Nashville and Berrien County needed. But the support did not materialize. It was opened again in April in 1997 and again in September 2000. Finally, in November of 2002, Gator Tails Restaurant made one last try, but it ended the commercial ventures at Lewis Lake. Today, there is little that remains of the once dream resort of Lonnie and Mitty Lean Lewis. The restaurant is a warehouse for family belongings. The sandy beaches are long gone and covered with weeds. The store was moved across the road, where South Georgia vegetation is taking ownership. And the overnight lodge that once was an oasis for the tobacco buyers went the way of the tobacco buyers. Oh, the boat ramp is still there, and for a daily fee of $5, you can fish to your heart's content and recall the days when Lake Lewis was just a mill pond and Averill Mill was where the children went to school. About 3/4 of a mile past Lake Lewis Road is a road you may have driven by 100 times and never noticed the sign proclaiming White School Road. The road's only 100 yards long or so, divided by the old Georgia-Florida railroad tracks and abruptly meeting Averill Mill Road. This is the location of White Station. The earliest designation of the White community was on the 1908 Hudgens Company Berrien County map. Just east of Averill Mill and south of the Georgia-Florida railroad tracks, you will find White Mill. This mill is also shown on later maps with the gin pond located on the south side of Highway 76. When the Ocilla, Pine Bloom, and Valdosta Railway merged into the Georgia-Florida Railroad in 1907, several flag stops were designated on the old railroad maps. The earliest 1907 map identified Bannockburn, Hill Post Office, also known as Garrett's, Powell, and Avery, spelled Avery. This is the only map that specifically designated Avra Mill as a flag stop. T.J. Jake Powell was the landowner on the north side of the tracks, slightly northeast of White Mill. But the most frequently identified flag stops on the railroad maps during the second decade of the 1900s were Bannockburn, Crenshaw, Weber, and White's. White Station was referred to in the early time schedules, though the map makers preferred to use the shorter form of White's. Of course, the turpentining operations in the area were the chief benefactors of the railroad, and with those operations came the need of a commissary, or a general store, for the convenience of the local still workers and farm families. One of the earliest known operators of the White Station Commissary was Fisher Jones and his wife Mary Griffin Jones. They operated the store shortly after their marriage in 1919, but by 1920 the couple moved to Cottle, where Fisher was born and raised. The next owner of the commissary was Lucius B. Gaskins, son of John A. Gaskins, the largest landowner in North Berrien County. Lucius and his father built a home near the White Commissary on the north side of the Georgia-Florida tracks, and his children all attended the Avra Mill School. Lucius and his wife, Leslie Parrish Gaskins, operated the store for 5 unproductive years, finally moving to Florida in 1925 during the big land rush. This old commissary was one of the last buildings remaining from White Station. It is shown here in a photo taken about 1955 with Helen Cook and Britta K. Gaskins. The building is no longer standing. When the William M. Avra estate went up for auction after his death in 1896, part of the parcels to be sold was 1.5 acres of Lot 176, which was in the Whites community, with a building known as the Cooper Church. The New Hope Church that the Avras attended was east of their home and was located where White School Road meets Avra Mill Road. The New Hope Church was still active as late as 1945, though their congregation was only 15. On this 1939 Georgia Department of Transportation map, the details show that there was a school at that same location. It is known that there was a colored school at White's and was believed to be called Side Camp School. It appears likely that the New Hope Church was used by the Board of Education as a school for the black children, as well as holding services for the New Hope congregation. It is more commonly known that the church building was finally used as a black church sometime after the black students were sent to Gaskins Consolidated School. In the 1956 GDOT map, the building was no longer identified as a school, but as a church. This map was the last time GDOT itemized the structures on their maps. So now, all indications of White Station have disappeared, and only the name on the road sign remains. However, recently, Carter Parrott RailNet, the Azalea Sprinter between Nashville and Willacoochee, asked the Berrien Board of Commissioners for approval to close the White School Road between Highway 76 and Avra Mill Road. The request was granted. So the road that was once a time conduit between the past and the present for more than 100 years will soon be gone. If you like to visit historic towns in Berrien County, Georgia, by staying on paved roads, the village of Cottle is not for you. This small community does not have a paved road in it, or even leading into it. However, that fact alone is what gives visitors to Cottle a sense of its early history. The history of Cottle attaches itself to the naval stores industry and the trees that brought not only the turpentine stills to the area, but the sawmills as well. The greater part of the area that was known as Cottle was once covered by hundreds of acres of longleaf yellow pine, the most sought-after forest in South Georgia. In 1900, the Shaw brothers, Chester and Lacey, along with their partner, George P. Griffin, were operating a turpentine still just south of today's Tifton Highway 125 on Raymond Roland Road. They were working over 60,000 boxes of longleaf yellow pine, which covered 5,000 acres of virgin timber from Tifton Highway 125 to Adel Highway 76, east of New River. Their leases consisted of 30,000 virgin boxes and 30,000 yearling boxes. Boxes, in naval stores jargon, were actually large cavities cut deep in the base of the pine tree. Chevron-shaped wounds were then cut into the tree above the cavity, which caused the pitch or gum to bleed into the cavity. The dippers would scoop out the gum into buckets and then into barrels and onto the turpentine still to separate the resin from the distilled liquid called turpentine. This early procedure of cutting deep cavities in the trees quickly shortened the life of the tree, which in turn brought in the sawyers and sawmills, cutting the trees and turning them into lumber. The earliest known sawmill operator in the area was Augustus C. Brewer, aged 39 in 1900. The 1905 Berrien County map shows Brewer located between Nashville and Massey on the east side of New River. The Brewer sawmill was possibly a loading point on the Nashville-Sparks Railroad line, which was created in 1901. Exactly how long Mr. Brewer operated the sawmill is not known, but in the March 6, 1905 issue of the Nashville Herald, it is reported that Mr. A.C. Brewer, owner of a large sawmill in Alapahaw and formerly of Nashville, died suddenly at the age of 42. He was well known in Vienna and Cordele and was buried in Stevens County, Georgia. This 1906 Berrien County map is the last time the Brewer operation is shown. Possibly the subsequent owners of the Brewer sawmill, or were operating another sawmill in the same area, were the Cottle brothers, Ebenezer J. and Solomon M. Cottle. In the 1900 census, Ebenezer, age 28, most likely the owner, was living with his brother Solomon, age 26, and his wife and a 1-year-old daughter. Both were engaged in the sawmilling business and living in a home adjacent to the Ansel Mathis family, shown here. It seems apparent that the Cottle brothers had operated the sawmill at least by 1904, when the Berrien Board of Education acknowledged the need for a permanent school in the Cottle Mills section of Camp Branch School. However, it appears the sawmill lasted just a few years longer. By 1910, E.J. Cottle was living and operating a lumber and shingle mill in Ty, Georgia. It was not until in 1911 that the community of Cottle showed up for the first time on the Berrien County map, and it has remained Cottle on every county map since. With the cutting of the yellow pine forests on the east bank of what was the Allapahoochy River came the early Cottle pioneers, who for the most part were farmers. Though many families came and went over the past 125 years or so, the families who stayed on have left their names on the road posts and mailboxes even today. Cornelius, Mathis, Tyson, Poole, Rowan, Harnage, and Jones, and others. And like all small communities, their names are intermixed through 4 or 5 generations of marriages. One of the earliest pioneers of the Cottle community was John Homer and Florida O'Quinn Cornelius, who moved to the Long Bridge area in 1895. 2 years later, in 1897, John suddenly passed away, leaving his wife a widow with 5 children, ages 8 to 17. She remarried Warren W. Folsom in 1903. In the meantime, her third oldest child, Benjamin F. Cornelius, then age 15, married Annie Jane Rowan, daughter of another Cottle pioneer, John T. Rowan, in 1901. 3 years later, they welcomed the birth of their first child, Clarence Homer. About 1910, a neighbor and carpenter, Richard F. King, agreed to build a home for the young couple on land lot 231 on today's Cornelius Road, leading north from the Long Bridge Church. And there they reared their 11 children. Though the home is still standing, it bears little resemblance of the fine home it once was. Cottle sits right across the New River from the village of Massey, and at the turn of the century, the two communities were linked by the Connell Bridge, named for the largest property owners on the Massey side of the bridge. This close proximity of the inhabitants of the two villages and the common place of worship, being the Pleasant Grove Church next to the Long Bridge School, brought about several marriages between the two communities. In April 1927, Benjamin Cornelius' son, Clarence Homer Cornelius, and Lila Pauline Connell, daughter of William E. Connell, caught the spark and were joined together in marriage. From this union came one of the largest families in the Cottle community, 13 children, 8 boys and 5 girls. Richard F. King had also built another home on land lot 230, northeast of the Ben Cornelius home. Homer had the roof on this building lowered and added rooms onto the back, and therein all 13 children were raised. As each married and made their own way, both near and far, they all have returned from time to time to this home to pay honor to those early pioneers that settled this property on the bank of the New River. About a mile off of Chaserville Road on Cottle Road was the home place of another Cottle pioneer, Ansel Mathis. The 1908 map indicates the Ansel Mathis home in land lot 185 of the 9th District. In 1900, he was the neighbor of the Cottle Brothers sawmill. He and his wife, Sarah Frances Bass, had 10 children, many shown here at the Mathis home in 1914, shortly after Ansell's death. Ansell's daughter, Laura Mathis, married John R. Tyson in March of 1909, and the couple moved into the Mathis home place. The Tyson couple had 5 children, their oldest being Evelyn Tyson. Evie Tyson was another love victim of the Massey Connells, marrying Guy Connell in June 1929. About 1935, the Mathis-Tyson home place caught fire and was burned to the ground. John R. Tyson moved across the Cottle Road from the burnt remains of their home and built a new home, which is shown here as it appears today. The home is no longer in the family. I mentioned earlier about the Cottle pioneer John T. Rowan, who was born in 1853 and married Clarissa Knight in 1876. About 1904, the couple purchased property in the Cottle area from John H. Harper, the father of one of their sons-in-law. John T. Rowan died in 1917, and their son-in-law abandoned their daughter, Mary Isabel, and her 2 children. The daughter and the 2 grown children took care of Clarissa until her death in 1934. One of those children of Mary Isabel was Missy Marie Harper, who married Vernon Harnage Sr. Vernon eventually bought the 84-acre farm from his mother-in-law. The farm remains in the Harnage family today, and another Cottle Road carries his name. Another child of pioneer John T. Rowan was his son Jesse Aaron Rowan. He acquired a portion of his father's estate and lived on the road that also carries his name today. The old Jesse Rowan home place shown here was originally on the east side of the road, but was moved across the road to its present location by Jesse's son, Geo Rowan. During the 1930s and early 40s, Cottle residents often received their groceries and household goods by way of Abe Levine's rolling stores. The products of these stores ranged from flour, rice, and sugar to kerosene for the home heaters. However, prior to the 1930s, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher Jones, son of Cottle pioneer Irwin Jones, moved to Cottle from White Station in 1919, where he was managing a general store. The couple set up a residence on what is now known as Henry Poole Road in downtown Cottle. Adjacent to their home, Fisher built this small frame structure and continued his general store business. Though his occupation in the U.S. Census was always listed as farmer, Fisher and his wife, Mary Griffin Jones, appeared to have operated the store through the 1920s and early 30s. Not only was he a farmer and storekeeper, he was also an accomplished carpenter. He was the local source for caskets, which he built in the back of the store. The couple were residents in Cottle until 1944, when they moved to a farm just north of Alapaha. Today, the store, with its rusty metal Big Boy sign still proudly mounted above the corner entry door, is the only hint of its early importance to the Cottle community. Across the Henry Poole Road from the Fisher Jones store was the Cottle Consolidated School. Henry M. Poole donated the 2 acres of land for the purpose of a new school in September of 1922. However, construction of the new school did not start until the school year of 1928 and 29 and was not completed until 1930. One of the earliest schools to offer education to the Cottle community was the Long Bridge School, created about 1905 when Mr. M.R. Lindsay donated 1 acre of land adjacent to the Pleasant Grove Church for the construction of the school. This school served the Cottle community as well as the residents on the south side of the Nashville-Adel Road until at least 1915. However, even by 1908, the school board addressed the need of a second school in the Cottle community. As early as July of 1904, at the height of the turpentining activity in the Cottle community, there was a school called Camp Branch, and it was likely located in the area north of the Nashville-Sparks Railroad line. In October of 1904, an addition to the school was proposed, which was situated 300 yards from the northwest corner of the field of W.D. Avra on the road between Bill Gaskin's home and Ansel Mathis's home. It is most likely this school operated from 1915 until the Cottle Consolidated School opened in 1928 and 29. Cottle Consolidated School contained grades 1st through 8th, with Bernice Peters being its first principal. However, during the course of its next 25 years, it had 10 principals and a number of teachers, often from the Cottle community. In this 1937 photo, it shows Principal Bernice Peters and 3 of the teachers, Marie Simmons Connell, Evie Connell, and Lucille Watson Poole. Mrs. Guy Connell and Mrs. Lucille Poole both became principals later at the school. The Cottle Consolidated School closed its doors after the school year 1953-54, and the students were sent by bus to the Nashville Elementary. The school property reverted back to the H.M. Poole estate. There was some efforts to preserve the building as a community center. However, in the end, only one portion was preserved when it was moved across Henry Poole Road and was converted to this residence that remains today. About 1918, Drew C. Fuller purchased Berrien County Lumber Company, with a sawmill and railroad siding at the easternmost section of Cottle in the Big Bend of Cornelius Road off of Highway 76. The property was known as Ruby Mill and was one of the finest lumber mills in Berrien County at the time. Drew C. Fuller, born in 1884, was an Irwin County native, and though he operated the Ruby Mill between 1918 and 1925, his family residence in the 1920 census was in Majestic, Irwin County, Georgia. However, on one Sunday afternoon excursion, he brought his wife and children and a few relatives to visit the Ruby location and snapped a few photos with their box camera. These photos are the only known images of Ruby Sawmill. His young son, Kyle Fuller, is shown in the photo here, about age 5 years old. 25 years later, shortly after World War II, Kyle became a contractor and builder of several homes in Nashville, including the Jefferson Street project. Drew Fuller sold the sawmill in 1925 and returned to Irwin County. Ruby Sawmill continued for several more years under new ownership. Finally, in 1967, the Georgia-Florida Railroad line to Moultrie was abandoned, and today, like the steam locomotives of the old Berrien Lumber Company, Ruby Mill is no more. After 3 weeks of learning the history of the Cottle community and its families, those that have passed on as well as those still remain, I came to a better understanding of why folks like Rudolph Cornelius and Donnie Connell still travel these often dusty roads back to the place they call their home. I decided to make one last drive on the washboardy roads to the last remains of the Connell Bridge. As I walked down the lane as far as it allowed, I couldn't help wishing that the bridge was still there. Perhaps that way of life that once was lied just across the Allapahootchee River, and things would be that way again. Well, maybe, just maybe, you will join me and we will find it on our next visit to one of the ghost towns of Berrien.